Hello, everyone, and welcome to the inaugural episode of the 250 Tour Meet the American Dream. Throughout the rest of this year, we are going to be talking to our fellow Americans in various parts of the country to get a local spin on their version of the American dream and what is going on regionally and locally with them, and also their takes on some national and international issues. Today, we have Matt Stumacher joining us. He is in the Los Angeles area, and I'll hand it off to Kelly and let her introduce Matt.
Happy early afternoon where I am. Like Richard said, we think there's a lot of great things happening in America, and we really want to highlight success stories, hear what's going on in different people's corners of the world, and really point to where we know we have our challenges here in America, but a lot of things are working, and they will continue to work and get better and better the more we work together. So we met Maddie here. I'll call him Maddie on two-way. And Maddie is going to tell us a little bit about his life in LA, what he's been up to and what he's seeing there, and get into a little bit of details of what's working there. So welcome, Maddie.
Well, thanks, Kelly, and thanks, Richard, for having me. Excited to chat with you both. Yeah, been out in LA for came out here when I was 24, so about almost 16 years now. And I've seen a lot of change. And I started in the hospitality industry, and I've done some openings and worked for some great restaurant groups, and seen a lot of interesting things. And I wouldn't call myself an American success, right? I think that anyone can accomplish the success. I think the true American success is trying to achieve the success, right? That might sound cheesy, but it's the ability to see that anything is possible and that today might be tough, but tomorrow could be different if you put a little bit whatever to it. Might sound old school, but the opportunities are out there. And I think the last couple of years I saw so much opportunity, especially in like the AI tech world, that I saw people using it for like Google search. Like, what are you guys doing? Right. So opportunity is always out there. That's what's beautiful about the American dream. And just happy to come on and talk to you guys about the good that's still out there.
And that's exactly why we started with you, Maddie, because we happen to agree, right? I don't know if anyone ever truly achieves the American dream, but the American dream is getting up, doing it every day.
I mean, trillionaires are still working
You know,
nonstop. Billionaires, like these guys don't stop, guys, girls, they don't stop, right? No matter what. So it's just like that constant, like, what's next?
yeah. And on that, to the point of opportunity. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about uh, your community, LA. What are you seeing there? Have things changed?
Yeah, so coming from the hospitality industry, I think the biggest collide with the private sector and what drives a lot of the economy in Los Angeles versus the government is just there's this two different worlds, right? And I think the best way to describe it is I call it the in and out economy. And when I came into Los Angeles, going to In and Out and getting a burger, fries, and drink would cost you $6.57. Right? Pretty good deal. Now it's 13.33. So when you look at, and that's still a great deal, like I have no problem paying for it, but the increase, right? It's because we've now passed that on to the employees. Well, then if that's In and Out and I'm just one person, imagine a family of four. Imagine going to a dinner now that used to cost you $120 now costs you $250. So, I just look at this misunderstanding in the last few years of the people who run the city and has driven a lot out. And it's a shame because LA is amazing. It really is. It's beautiful. It's got, I can go from here to there, I can, the beaches, everything. It's just not well taken care of recently. And I don't think it should be political to want to have your city, cleaned up. Listen, that last mayor's race, I just got to say, like, where's Nithya Raman now? I have not seen one ad or anything since that race, and it's just a little weird.
Couldn't agree more. And man, saying that, I feel like people look at me like, "Get your tinfoil hat out." But it's honestly, it's not crazy.
It's not crazy, and I'm not saying that he got, like, cheated out of it, it's the system, right?
Yeah.
We set up systems that are legal, that work, but it's just not, not working, and especially just how the city is ran and the priorities, and I think that this city, it's got some greatness to it, but I look at some industries specifically that I've been in, and hospitality, a lot of companies have downsized and shifted to other states like Florida or Texas, or they'll keep like their staples here, or that groups from that are their bread and butters in New York or other places that have come out here. They've seen LA as a different market and they've scaled back a little bit as well. So I think that LA is going through a change in a lot of markets, tech as well. We're seeing a lot of these tech companies leave. Seen a lot of offices go from 2 campuses to 1 or a lot more remote jobs out of, like, Seattle, Texas kinda thing.
Yeah, Silicon Hill. Now, this may be a difficult question to answer, but I wonder, like here in New York, I've started to pay a little bit more attention to what is like a local policy versus a state policy versus even, even federal. I guess, what do you see happening there? Do you feel like it is largely state, more local?
I think you're speaking to something that people really don't understand very well, and I think that's the problem with our politics. I was blown away to see so much local politics talk about things that they can't do, right? "We're gonna fight ICE. We're gonna fight Trump." Like, you're running for local politics. What do you mean? And we've convoluted all that because it's become kind of I think we've gotta recalibrate the people going into civic duty. I don't see a lot of people getting it to the right reasons. I don't see people getting into, "I wanna become mayor for the right reasons." Not enough right now, at least. And I think the more we get into that and people realize from a voter's perspective of what these people can and can't do, and they take the R&D away from it or the talking points away from it, it's like, yeah, it's great you say that, but you can't do any of those things. So let's focus on what you actually can do. And then that's such a mismatch right now in the public.
Yeah, one example in LA might be where was Mayor Bass when those fires broke out?
Well, and just recently, I mean, talk about infrastructure. We had a 100-year-old pipeline burst
Yep.
and just went down Sunset Boulevard. And I mean, your parking garage your car could have been covered in water going to work on Friday morning. So it's just like, we don't take care of our infrastructure. And that could have happened anywhere. I get it. But how does a 100-year-old pipeline continue in a city like this when we pay the taxes we do we see where the money goes? And those fires were just really mismanaged. They really were. So, but I think Spencer Pratt really spoke to how people feel in LA. I think Pratt different than what's his face? Caruso, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Caruso kind of fell in line with this like typical he got labeled the typical Republican, where
Mhm.
Pratt really got, I think, people to kind of break away from partisan a little bit. I was surprised he didn't win, to be honest with you, or at least finish second. Because I felt like a lot of people who wouldn't normally vote against a Democrat voted for Pratt.
Yeah. Well, I think you could probably say even some of that in this last presidential election, right? The middle, whether independent, Democrat, you can't, because, and this is my personal opinion I'm injecting here, when things get to a certain point of disrepair and you're not listening to the issues of the people, right? Like, they always say it's the economy stupid or whatnot, or it's literally maybe your house burning down and feeling ignored, like in the Palisades. There just a certain amount of assumption of
Well, I'll give you on a national level for myself, something that I always get a little heat for, but I think you both will appreciate. I was the person who was like, no way Trump will win first term against it. I was the person celebrating Biden's victory. And then I would say 2 years into Biden's, I would say after October 7th, especially, I started scratching my head. And then I voted for Trump the last one. And people are like, how? And I'm like, I mean, how could I have not? I mean, just of where the policies shifted and where the Democratic Party has shifted.
you mind getting into that a little? Like, if you're comfortable, what were the
Yeah.
things that you were starting to see that you were like, "Whoa."
Well, the response to October 7th was number one. And, people had plenty of time in his first term to paint him as they tried to, right? They try to make him this anti-Semite person, and his actions said otherwise. With the Abraham Accords, you look at his family, and I'd say other than himself, his favorite person is his daughter, who's Jewish,
Yeah,
his
yeah.
grandchildren,
Right.
and his Jewish son-in-law, and Witkoff, who's Jewish. Like, he surrounds himself, for a guy who hates Jews, he surrounds himself with a lot of Jews. And so I found, so that didn't work the first 4 years, right? They try to label that, and then the response to October 7th. I spent a month in Israel when I was 18. I've always been really focused on the Middle East politics. I was always like dead set on Iran, that they were a problem that had to be taken out. Not as a country, but the regime.
Yeah.
And the response that I saw October 7th, I was like, I felt like I was in bizarro world. I understood it from some of the extremism, but how it spread through. And then more than that, I look at people who like, I don't want to bash specific, but Michelle Obama, for example, she said nothing about the women.
Yeah.
I watched so much women silent, but then expect me to, like, preach about these other moments, or, I'm like, I'm watching women getting raped in Gaza and say nothing. And it came out, and just the response of the hypocrisy just blew me away. And just that really just was the biggest one for me.
Yeah.
So, first off, Maddie, you set a very, very high bar for an amazing background. You got Steve McQueen, Winston Churchill. That's a high bar for future guests for this series, and I can't see everything else you got back there,
Well,
but
this is a Soho House, Malibu picture of Bobby, Jack, and Ted Kennedy
yeah,
in Malibu. So it's my favorite picture. And then these are all from travels with my dad. So I actually got this in the Churchill War Rooms, got this in London, and I got that on in France with my dad too. So yeah, they're all just
wow,
friends.
talk about bringing your A game. I love it. So about local politics in Los Angeles with the mayor's race in November. Obviously, Karen Bass is going to win, but I would imagine. But with the primary, to what extent, if any, did Spencer Pratt's to what extent did Israel and anti-Semitism play a role in the primary and how the results played out?
Great question. I think that we saw in this race the result of the teams already are set, right? Like that in the last 2+ years since October 7th and with this influx of DSA and the Mamdanis, we saw that the map was set. You if you feel this way about things like the whole F-ICE, free Palestine, like the boxes were already aligned. So you must vote this way if you want to be one of the cool kids, I guess you could say, right? In this city was the feeling. Unless you wanted to be known as a MAGA racist, you did not vote for Pratt. And I think that's what like the media and the politics has done, where they've made you feel like, well, these are the people you must vote for because they say these things. So it was like you could have handed me a list of everyone I know in Los Angeles, and I probably would have been able to pick 99% of who they voted for ahead of time because everyone's become so predictable in their allegiance. And I think that election showed it so much.
How much of that, it's interesting. We kind of touched on this earlier. The advice, the is free Palestine, whatnot. How much of I saw. I don't know if you guys saw the New York Times that Lulu interviewed Mandami recently,
Yeah.
and she's asking him about. He mentioned Netanyahu coming potentially arresting him. And you mentioned it earlier, the local politicians and what they can actually do. In the comments on the YouTube video are why she's trying to grill him, gotcha questions. Why ask him about Israel? Why is she even asking him? And I'm not normally a YouTube commenter, but I said, hey, because he's constantly talking about it. Here we have the mayor of an American city constantly talking about things he has absolutely no control over. But to me, it just does it like I get maybe the kind of brainwashed DSA members aren't gonna challenge him, but where is the media on that?
Well, you nailed it right there, Kelly. That there's this like crave for everyone to try to find their own Mamdani in whether like in their own party, in their own city. And it's this brainwashness of like they can't like do these like a mayor of Los Angeles can't fight ICE, like I mean, yeah, you cannot let them in the city, but on a national level, you're not gonna go out there and defund that. And I don't understand that that's the focus of a city of, oppose, things like this. So and
But
that's
there's
what it
no
turned into.
is there pushback? I mean,
There
is
is by a silent minority because the problem is, LA, the best way to describe Los Angeles is you're still in high school, right? You're still in high school in Los Angeles. And if you want to go and, hang with the cool kids and if you're single and you're out and, all of a sudden something gets brought up and your common sense response then gets you labeled a certain way, then it's like your night out of fun just got derailed, and then you're labeled a certain way. It's just this whole like you no longer could sit at the table, I guess. And so you have to be prepared to go a lonely road, which I've done. I love the unfollow button or the mute button. I really don't care what people think. There's a lot of like dating in the city has gotten really tough. I mentioned, but just like because of that, like unless you show up with your checklist of like, yes, I feel this way about these things, you're not welcome almost.
and do you feel like most of those people, do they genuinely feel like that? How educated are they on the topic? Like when I hear DSA members saying we're going to abolish the Senate, it is so crazy.
You know, the biggest thing that comes to my mind, and I say to myself, I was so lucky to work during COVID. The first thing that comes to my mind is, what did you do during COVID? And I think that really, not to like pinpoint on one thing, but I think so, like the younger generation especially lost so much social skills. They isolate themselves, they brainwash themselves. And that or like they're just all on ketamine, I mean, that's my only, I'm like, either they're all on ketamine, like some of them look like they are, but they just think of like the social skills that we got in your last years of high school, early years of college, in those years. And I just think that so much of the youth didn't get that. And I look at the numbers of the youth and I'm like, yeah, I mean, look at just how they look at the data centers and it's like, there's no critical thinking, right? It's like, here's a sign, please read this sign and believe this sign. It's like almost a cult. And it's sad to see this, like, and even people that and the problem is it's not just the younger people. You get a
Yeah.
few of the other people in there, so it validates it for the young people.
I
So
think
can
that's a great point about your social skills and how important those last couple of years of high school is. And one thing I tell people or I say to people is that because obviously our COVID experience was different based on where we were, and I actually left the Washington D.C. area in 2020 in the middle of COVID, and was shocked to see how different the rest of the country was, and we were pretty extreme in the DC metro area. But one thing I ask people is who are somewhat dismissive of COVID is what if somebody took away the last 2 years of your high school experience? What if, and I, because myself, like if I couldn't have played baseball and football and the friendships and the bonds that I still have to this day, people that I went to high school with were still great friends. And everything I learned about being a good teammate and a leader and a good follower and trusting people, and to have all of that taken away. The first girl I ever, kind of loved my senior year in high school, like all of these things. If you did not go through any of that, I just wonder how much that would impact somebody negatively for the rest of their life. You just really can't put a value to it. It's so, so important. And I think your point is really, really.
and I believe LA schools were closed some of the longest in the country, if I remember
They
correctly.
were, and I felt really bad. I mean, pause for on you're 100% Richard on the last year's of high school. Felt really bad for the parents of like the 5 and 7-year-olds. I'm like, "Oh, your kids aren't learning anything, and that you're having to teach." So it was like a double-edged sword. So we really botched that. And no wonder we've fallen in California in reading and just basic education because we just zoomed for 2 years throughout and we just lost so much social skills. And I think of like my senior week, I think of prom, I think of all like having to call a girl and ask her to prom, all that stuff that people missed out on. And now they're just streaming on YouTube and they're all isolated. And it's like, no wonder.
Has there been any reckoning or calls for that or calls to evaluate?
Nah, I mean, not, I don't hear anything. I think like I'm surprised we haven't gotten more of like a post-COVID evaluation as a whole. But I think that has become so partisan too. Like I don't think we're not there yet to have a critical thinking conversation of COVID just yet.
So you mentioned you worked through it. Can you tell us a little bit about, what
So
your role was before, during, after?
I'll give you a quick one. I was working my butt off for a hospitality company and I had a vacation planned and I was going to go to Italy, France, England. And when I was in the air, the world changed. And so like, it was, it was like a few places here and there, but nothing major. And I got to Rome while I was in the air, the world changed. Everything got canceled. I was at the Vatican, completely empty. It was like a movie set. Had to fly out early to London, came back after the travel ban. Like I saw all the chaos unfold and then hit up my company that I was working for. And they're like, well, go take a vacation. I'm like, nah, I just tried that. That didn't work out. And long story short, one of the partners of the company's brother was a doctor. So a few people started hitting him up like, hey, can your brother test me? And then we turned a bunch of the venues we had and the infrastructure we had and, receptionists and everything to a COVID testing company. And I was director of ops for it, and I was running several drive-throughs. We did the Netflix Gray Man, so it was like and then we did like a Jeff Goldblum show. So I was like talking a bunch of like everyone, right, from the testing facilities, the labs to the nurses to the studios, everything, and then so kept me going the whole time, and I was getting tested 3 times a week because I had to show up to all these places. I was one of the first to ever have it. I got it when I originally, and then uh, and so then it was kind of in the flow. But I saw that I wasn't a COVID expert by any means, but I was like, no one really was either. And I was just willing to go in, learn and have conversations with people and do the best I could.
That's an incredible pivot. So when you say hospitality, what type of work or what was the company doing? But maybe
A
more
lot of like, you know, this group, a big in LA with, it was Hwood Group. So it was, a lot of like high end hospitality, like Delilah, nice guy, like A lot of big celebrities will go there. You'll see a lot in the tabloids and whatnot.
Okay.
Yeah.
So restaurants, big venues?
Like restaurant lounges, clubs, Peppermint was like a music venue that we did drive through. Pop up at Delilah. We did, the company itself has a ton of big venues.
How how was that working? Did you have to work with, like, the local municipalities then?
Surprisingly, no. It was the only real thing that we got from the cities were like, these are the tests you could use and the tests you couldn't use. And I will say this, if you trace back the rapid testing and the PPE, the rapid testing was Garcetti's brother. The mayor's brother was the company, and the PPE was related to Gavin Newsom. So everything had some sort of like, you must use these companies or these testing things because it all traced back to someone profiting on it. And then it would be like all of a sudden you couldn't use these tests, you had to use these, and that was why. But I say this: I saw so many people making money. I saw the insurance companies the most. There was a company that I saw do some real bad scamming, same day testing, and they get nabbed for like millions because the insurance companies, I just were like, they were so just chomping at the bit.
Yeah. So how did you were management, right? You weren't, like, serving. You weren't a
No,
test
no, yeah. I mean, I
employee.
served like years and years ago, but I've been like
Yeah,
a
but you
management
weren't
or like director or yeah, some sort of
were you guys able to keep on? Like, how did that work with staff? I guess I'm kinda getting to what was the various impact across LA? Did it really shut down? What areas did you see it hit?
LA shut down for a while. It was pretty crazy how it was shut down. And when I came back from that trip before we started the COVID testing, there was like a little gap. It was March. We probably started the company like late May. I was sick in April. And I came back like late March. When I came back and they were like, "Oh, you should take a vacation. We're fine. We're gonna get paid." 72 hours later, we all got laid off. Right. So and like I was really tight with my boss. So, he was like assured me like we were all good. And then he got laid off. Like we all got laid off, right? So that came out of nowhere. And then they were trying to bring us back. And that didn't work. And then we pivoted to the COVID. And I realized not everyone was able to come back. And I was very lucky, because not everyone in the company could even come back. And then I saw an opportunity and I was like, and I just went with it. And so I think I look back at COVID and I see that as I'm very fortunate that I had that experience.
Yeah, where not everyone was, right?
Yeah.
It was very much I guess I look back, I was in New York and, we got locked down. We were, again, shut down for a while. The district I'm in, all the schools shut down for the remainder, kinda hit in end of February, beginning of March. I think nationally, all the schools shut down for the rest of that year, right, across the country. But then that next year, like, different states took different approaches and whatnot. Like Florida was largely open, Texas was more open, their education system, and here in the district I'm in, it's a pretty wealthy district, right? And doesn't rely on state funds at all, and actually was able to work it so the elementary school were back in person 4 days a week. Yeah, even the middle school and high school were at least three. They alternate to 3 and 5, and so it's a district that's already got really good test scores, right? And good, and then stays open. People, you couldn't buy a house in the district. You couldn't because most of the other districts were just, closed Zoom and for a long time. And now I really see how it was a rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Was there?
I did a lot of pods, a lot of like school pods on testing where the families, like the schools were shutting down and they were like, screw this. They would pay these teachers and we would come and we'd test like the pods so these families because you're right, like money, it was a true exposure. Money will keep you going and everything else, you're kind of screwed. And it was, yeah.
Yeah, because the private schools all went back in person too. But again, right, if you can afford it,
I thought it was beautiful seeing our 50 states in action. If you really paid attention, you're like, well, I don't like the laws I have here. I'm going to move here. Great,
right?
right? Like yeah, you got to pack up and move. But if you don't like what's going on here, you can leave, and it's not that hard, like compared to like moving a country. So it was pretty cool seeing that in action.
That's a
Yeah,
great point. I live in Northern Colorado, and our governor, Jared Polis, I'm not a huge fan of him, but in 2022, in the spring of 22, we were just coming out of it. It depended on which county you lived in, and I live in a very blue county, but I can hit a golf ball into Weld County, Colorado, where it's, extremely, red county, and what I thought was really interesting New Mexico in the spring of 22 was starting to do some crazy mass stuff again. And our governor said, we're not doing that. Period. End of story. And I sent an email to the governor's office in like September of 22 and said, I'm going to vote for you because I want you to have an overwhelming majority. Okay. But the only reason I'm voting for you is because of what you said about the silly COVID mandates. That they actually replied and said, "Noted that you want us to have a huge, popular vote win, and that we have a mandate." So, I was actually, rather, pleased about, a little bit of democracy in action there, I guess, if you will, but, COVID was I knew some people that didn't buy it from the beginning. My twin brother was one of them, and, I did for a little bit, and then one morning, I lived in a high-rise building, Arlington, Virginia, right across from DC, and I could see a public park. And one morning, I was on my balcony with a cup of coffee, and I saw City taking a grill, and they were removing the rims basketball court. So you could not play basketball. The tennis nets were coming down, and it was just like being outside can't be bad. And it was just amazed. It amazed me how quickly so many people fell in line with the stupidity of it. And one other quick story: when we started to open up a little bit in Virginia, neighborhood sports bar. Some friends and I went to it, and we were regulars there, watching football on Sundays and whatnot. American football, sorry, Maddie. But
Love the
uh,
NFL.
yep. But the bar was closed. You could not sit at the bar. You could sit at the tables. So, and the bartender would walk out from behind the bar and take your order. So, myself and three of my friends were sitting at this high top table. And I know the owner, I know the managers very well, good friend, been going there for years, right? So, I get up to use the restroom and I see some friends sitting at another table on my way to the restroom. And so I talk to them. And the manager comes up to me and he says, "Hey, Rich, if you got to go straight to the bathroom. Okay. You can't stop and talk to people and you can't take your mask off. You had to put your mask on to leave your table to go to the bathroom." And he's like, "If you do that again, I'm going to have to throw you out." He's like, "If the health inspectors come." Then I'm like, okay, this is absolute insane. And I wonder how easy the American public would fall for something like that again. And what you think of that, Maddie?
Great question. I mean, well, I remember having to train some of those rules. I remember reopening and having to tell staff, this is what you can do. And the rules out here are pretty crazy. And the guests, man, they did not take well to some of those rules. Made no sense. You couldn't talk to people. You had to put your mask on. You kept going, all these things. Would people fall for that again? 100. I mean, look at some of the stupidity they're falling for now. I mean, like, listen, it depends on who you blame, right? I mean, we see how easily people want to just pick a villain, how easily they are if so and so tells them, if it fits a narrative, there's no, critical thinking to it. It's like, oh, that's an easy check. Yeah, no problem. And on the flip side, and it's really interesting to see all this stuff with China, like I look at like at history, how was it not so obvious that clearly this it wasn't just like a natural disaster, right? I mean,
Right.
I'm not going to
Right.
say that China deliberately did this to us, but this didn't just happen out of nowhere. And if another country had done COVID, the reaction I think would be a little different, but it's China, so it's whatever. And so then if it is a villain that fits a script better, I think people would run with it. So, I mean, let's just say this, if Israel did it, right, people would love that narrative, right? I mean, I'm not
Oh
saying
yeah.
you would, but people would fall for that narrative very easily with all the anti-Semitism out there.
That's a really great point about China and Israel and how it fits people's narratives. Do you think that this trend, I guess, is what I'll call it, of the Democratic Party and the DSA as well, this trend of anti-Semitism, that's what I call it, and just rigid opposition to any support for Israel. Do you see this trend being reversible, or is it going to get a lot worse before we have a chance of it getting better?
Yeah, and maybe could you think about that on like a state, local, and if you noticed a difference in your
I think I don't know if I think the problem will be more isolated, right? I think like you notice it more like if you're living in Brooklyn, right? You're probably like, oh man, this Mamdani and the anti-Semitism versus if you're living in other parts of the country. But I think as a whole, we will get over it. I look my sister and my dad ask me all the time because they haven't quite gotten to the point where they could vote for someone like Trump, but they definitely are like, I could never vote Democrat again. And they're lifelong Democrats. And we talk all the time about it, of what the party does. I do think the party gets a little worse before it gets better for a good reason. I also think that these midterms personally is a huge turning point for them, good or bad. I hope that when you look at the data, it looks like these candidates that might work in these, like the primaries are different than the generals. And I think they're going to learn that lesson. And this is my hope is, and I hope that the Democrats get their butt kicked in the midterms and they learn they have to put out more reasonable candidates. My fear is if they win one of the two, the House, they might continue down this path and then put someone, like a radical pair out there and not get behind some pragmatism and fall in that same primary versus general trap and get destroyed, which maybe they need to do. But I would like us to get into the booth 2028 and actually like both candidates and be conflicted on who we vote for. That's
Wouldn't that
that.
be refreshing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or at
I think we could
least
get there.
I was reading a book
Man, I
about
hope so.
constitutional convention about when these guys, they built our constitution. And the author said something that I think we might be starting to get away from today. Even though there was disagreement about, equal representation, like a bicameral house that is by population versus state, and how strong a national government versus state government, they all were working off the same foundational principles, right? Like individual rights, strong property rights, that government should play somewhat of a limited role. But when I sometimes am looking at what and I believe that the Democratic and Republican Party have traditionally been the very similar, right? But this more recent shift where some of these candidates, but even they're being called out. There are some Democrats calling them out saying, whoa, 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 we do not support abolishing the Senate and the president.
Kelly, the best your question about state, local, and federal. I recently listened to Scott Galloway, who I don't agree with on a lot, but when it comes to like tech and business, I think I listen to his markets a lot more. But he said something that I did agree with, and he called out this DSA movement, his party, and how it just does not win in a general. And he said, unless they're trying to accomplish, they have a better chance of accomplishing some sort of European form where like, okay, these areas have become so indoctrinated with this, that they kind of just do their own thing and they're kind of isolated, but that they they have a better chance of shifting in some European fragmented, than ever having some sort of power over the all 50 states, right? And that's what he was trying to say. Like, you guys have no chance of doing this. So what are you trying to accomplish? It's only going to backfire. And that's really how I look at it. Like, when you look at these failed experiments, like I laugh at Mamdani. I laugh at Seattle. I think all these things eventually, come to fruition of like,
The bill's
that
going to
didn't
come
work.
due at
Yeah,
some point.
exactly. Maybe I'm a little too optimistic, but eventually history does recalibrate. It might not always take as long as you'd like, but I mean, and just look at what Mamdani's doing. I mean, it doesn't take all it takes is someone to not be diehard R or blue, R or D, and to
Yeah.
be like, okay, this guy's not doing anything that's really working.
I
Yeah.
I hope you're right. I'm a little more pessimistic, but I hope you're right, Maddie. I think DSA is a real threat, but I hope you're right, and I don't discount what you're saying as a possibility. But I
Right.
what I think is really going to be a good bellwether is these midterms and see just how these DSA folks do in general elections. Some of them will probably win, but I just like to see the breakout of how much of the vote they actually do get, and yeah, it's scary, but I hope you're right. I hope Galloway's right as well.
Well, I think the polling, we talk about this all the time on the show sometimes, but the polling that we saw came out, I don't think that Platinum was pushed out because of his, definitely not his tattoo. And I sadly don't think he was pushed out because of the rape allegations. I think he was pushed out because they saw the polling. I think behind the
Right.
scenes, they were like, oh, this guy, we need just a generic Democrat. We're falling for the primary general trap. And that's why they pushed forward because the allegations were already out there. They just made it more, they reworded it and just made it more, sharp on him and forced people to really take a position. But overall, it's not even just him. You look at like Michigan, like an El Sayed, like they're gaining all their candidates, they're falling for the Mamdani trap. And I would argue Mamdani got the lowest amount of votes that a New York mayor should have gotten that won, right? That's not like he should have gotten 65%. He wasn't even a good candidate.
No, he was a
Right.
pretty bad candidate.
Yeah. So I'm not even sold that Mamdani had some, like, historic victory. I think he just squeaked by.
And Mondami already, he's been in the New York State Assembly. I will say the DSA has made some inroads in the New York State legislature and government enough to apply some pressure. But again, like with Kathy Hochul, they were able to kind of negotiate some crazy stuff, but she is very unpopular. So to secure her own election, right, she's making deals with the devil and that are just going to crush her, I think, in the general, she barely, well, not barely, she beat Lee Zeldin by like 3 points or so in this last general election, which is pretty close, actually.
Let me ask you both this. Where would you compare California versus New York? Like, what do you think is ran worse, and what do you think is a better chance of kind of showing that poorly mismanagement?
Richard, did you want to go?
No, you go ahead first. No,
Mm. Um,
that's a great question.
Yeah, it is a great question. I just full confession, I'm not as familiar with like the state legislature and all of those operations in California. I can speak to New York much better. I will say they we passed their well the Senate was Republican controlled, the New York State Senate until till the 2018 election. So beginning 2019 and on, it's been a supermajority Democrat. And since so early 2019, they passed this wild climate or energy climate policy that is actually it's unfeasible. I mean, even at the point it called to shut down nuclear power plants, which we did before the replacement technology existed, because to power New York City, its old systems, the way our grid is kind of hodgepodge, and the way New York State, the grid works and whatnot, and the regional utilities. And even like the state ended up suing itself. Now it's suing itself because the DEC, who had to come up with these rules and laws, is like they were, their role was to come up with the actual provisions and the laws and what that was going to lead, the technology that was going to lead into this transition. And they were like, we can't do this. The technology doesn't exist, right? So you have the grid operators saying, no, this is not a feasible program, right? Like, this is not a feasible plan. Yet they go forward with it anyways, right? And so New York is highly dysfunctional right now, and we are on borrowed money, borrowed time, and we're losing a lot of, recent money's been flowing out of New York. New York significantly outspends California in education per pupil, and results are terrible, getting worse. So I actually think I'm hopeful New York is now on the cusp, because just the energy costs, I was complaining my power went out yesterday. We've seen the last couple of years sudden increase in power outages. Takes longer to get them restored. And my utility rates have over doubled in the last couple, like the bill. It's more than doubled. Even like in the last year or two, it's almost doubled. And so if you go over the last, since that policy was signed, it might be up almost 250%, which if you're an average family, right? That's just rushing you. So I'm optimistic. I see an incredible amount of dysfunction and seeming like almost like an unwillingness. They call them the big five cities. So it's New York City, Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, and Albany. They're so different than the rest of the state. The rest of the state, which is largely rural, we banned fracking, we buy it from Pennsylvania, all this. I'm wondering at what point it's going to break. Like, how much longer can we go down this road where we spend like crazy and people leave? From what I know of California, sounds like it's somewhat similar. But then like New York, I mean, this climate legislation, it's by far the most aggressive. Like, it blew California out of the water. Here's another example where we're worse than California. Seeker is our environmental review process, which for development, which is on top of the NEPA, which the whole country faces. Even California pulled their review back over 10 years ago. New York still hasn't done it, right? So I think in some ways where we might be a little less dysfunctional is state projects like the light rail. But my biggest concern is actually the inequality it's creating, right? I think it's a self-fulfilling cycle. And the more expensive it gets, the more the haves, it's easier for the haves to live versus the have-nots. And then you start even then more redistribution, the wealthier leaving, right? Or they flock to certain areas. So essentially you're paying for certain things that used to be standard place. And so I currently, what I see is more and more division and inequality, and it's rising. And you send your kid to a private school if you can afford it, right? all of this? I know it's kind of a long-winded answer, but I'm hopeful that maybe it is going to break, but when that happens and the damage that's done and is how much is reversible. That being said, and I would be interested to hear this from you too, yeah, too, after we kind of discuss this topic. What is working there, right? So I didn't want to, Richard, I know you want to
Richard,
weigh
what do you
in.
think?
So,
From an outsider, what do you see? And
well,
maybe
I spend a lot of time in New York City. I've never spent any time in the state of New York outside of New York City, primarily Manhattan. So, and I get that it's a very different state when you leave New York City. JD Vance was on Joe Rogan's podcast a few days ago, and they talked about California. And I'm paraphrasing what the vice president said, but he basically said, "We can't give up on California. It's too much of the American culture. It's too important. It's the most important state militarily. It's the most important. It's the number one agricultural state in the country, and we can't give up on it. I worry more about New York State than I do California because so much of New York State is New York City, and the finance industry can go anywhere. Not saying they will, but they can. And there's already been some migration to Miami and obviously Charlotte, but I worry more about New York State. I love California. I spent a lot of time in San Diego. Love San Francisco. I hear it's getting better in San Francisco. San Francisco is one of my favorite places in the country for restaurants and their food scene. Spent time in Napa Valley, spent time in different military bases in California. I've seen a lot of the state. It's beautiful. The weather's amazing. I really, really do worry though that what's going to happen in San Francisco and LA is that divide between those cities and the rest of the state. A lot of people don't know. I mean, California has the most Republicans of any state in the country. And I get it. It's not easy for people to just up and leave. The people that do usually have more means, but I worry more about New York State. But I feel like New York State is doing better than California at a state level of managing what's going on. And California has an image problem with the country. It's the butt of a lot of jokes. I've spoken on this on other shows, and I mean, just the high speed rail and comparing how much it costs, just 1 mile of high-speed rail versus, what's been done in other parts of the world, other types of infrastructure projects. And just real quick, Maddie, how much do Californians understand or acknowledge their image problem with the rest of the country?
I would say I don't think they're as aware of it, and I think if anything, I don't think they really care because 'cause they're like, they're out here in, like, sunny California. They're like, "Cool, you're making fun of us while you're in your snowstorms, and we're
because
out
you're
here on
jealous.
the beach." Yeah,
Right.
like, California, it's hard to, like, hate on California, I will say that, right? And I'm from New York. I'm born 59th and 2nd. So, I saw a lot of friends on the East Coast. So I think it's, Kelly nailed it. Like New York City represents New York a lot more, where like LA, San Francisco, and then you also San Diego. So you have a balance. And I think yeah, LA might be the more popular of those three, but New York City, I think, is more of, in my circle at least, more of the butt of the jokes because of just where it's come with like this Mamdani movement and this like, DSA movement. And I don't see LA as DSA. Listen, I do not see people with Hezbollah and Hamas flags out here or bandanas they did, I'd be in jail right now. So I see that in New York, but I don't see that in LA. Maybe I'm just not looking for it, but LA is a lot more spread out too. But I will say this about Gavin Newsom. I think I think I was the last one to still like Gavin. I don't anymore, but in my circle, a lot of people did not like Gavin, and I still did because I thought he was good. I did not like his recent shift. His biggest regret will be that he didn't force Kamala out because I think he would have beat Trump in 2024. I really do. I don't think Trump so much as won as just like Kamala was just such a terrible candidate. I
Right.
actually think that Gavin, at that time, I think Gavin would have gotten enough votes where he would have won. Since then, no way. I think he's done the biggest drop in votes. I don't even think he'll run next run around. But if he did, I would say that he could sell the problems of California better than the governor of New York could sell the problems of New York. And I think the people believe it because California, it's not just that like, yeah, Hollywood's maybe left LA, but to your point, Richard, about agriculture and what Vance said, California is so much more, right? And I think it's just so valuable. It's so beautiful in itself, but just from a economic standpoint, I think it's hard to argue against California, where New York, you see the finance move. And I spoke to someone who used to be a high executive Wells Fargo, who's retired now, and he used to commute to New York, and he was living in Bucks County, and spoke to me recently. He's like, "Maddie, the finance is done in New York. Everyone's in the
Yeah.
Carolinas. That's where it's at
Yeah.
now." It's like blown away with that, like the change in all that. So
Ron
great.
DeSantis calls Mondami Florida Realtor of the Year.
Yeah, yeah,
I
I
mean, he makes
completely agree. I think Kathy Hochul she is uniquely bad at her job.
terrible. My God.
and
Terrible.
Yeah, New
And
York's a joke.
yeah,
Yeah.
it really
Yeah, like,
I live
Gavin doesn't put people up there, like, that look not to, like, judge on looks, but, like, Mondani, I think, intentionally looks for, like, some weird people to go up there for press
yeah,
conferences, and, like, Gavin
oh,
doesn't do
yeah.
that.
no, totally. I mean, and Hochul, she's so desperate to stay in power. I mean, she's still toxic from Cuomo, but, so and I really think she's just being completely exploited, taken advantage of, and whether she knows it or not, I don't know, but, I think she's uniquely terrible at her job.
Well, there's a little bit of a listen, I don't wanna get hung up on New York and Cuomo, but I don't think that Cuomo got a fair deal, personally,
Yeah.
and I think that when you make things so political witch hunt,
Yep.
you can this is what you get, right? Like, you
Yep.
had no one's perfect. You had a guy who's doing a way better job, and you chose to go after him for some questionable things that, I mean,
But
then all of a sudden you accepting everyone else. I don't know, it's just weird.
he died by the own sword, his own party's sword, and
But he's
he
American.
may not have been as woke, to be fair to him, but there's this faction in New York that is, right? And in state politics.
And, to your point, Maddie, about California, it's, going back to the title of this pod, Superpower Logic. Also, I think you are the first dog of our podcast has made an appearance on your camera, Maddie. So you're really bringing your A game today. But to California, it is so important to the United States' ability to be the world's biggest superpower. San Diego, the United States Navy, the Air Force Flight Test Center at Edwards Air Force Base. I could go on and on and on, and not to mention, obviously, the agriculture and just how important California is. If California shut down and seceded tomorrow, the United States would be in a lot of trouble. So and it is being run better. And I mean, Kelly, I would think that a lot of New Yorkers would take Cuomo back in a heartbeat over Kathy Hochul right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. Like, ballot access is an issue in New York, and I'm really harsh on New York, but I am deeply concerned, especially about this growing inequality. I think the reason I see for an underlying cause, I may sound like a TSA member right now, but I think their policies will only make it much worse. But there is potential, and we're just kind of leaving it on the table. This data center moratorium. And really what Hochul did was she put a ban on issuing any permits for hyperscale data centers. So it's an executive order just stopping the state from issuing any permits, which is kind of like a backhanded way, of doing it. But there's also a lot of rumblings that was actually her trying to save face because the DSA, there's some legislation trying to get jammed through that would permanently stop data centers from being built in New York State. So I sorry. Do you?
It's just mind-boggling that how the DSA has taken these clear anti-American policies,
Yeah.
and then a governor goes along with it. I just can't help but find that humorous in America. It's like, clearly, this is a adversary working
Yeah.
against you.
Yeah.
There's so much evidence to point to it. There's so much money that comes from it. It's just mind-boggling how this has become a thing, and you see I think that's the problem right now with the Democrats is it's like they're like, "Well, I'm not a member of the DSA." Yeah, but you're certainly appeasing to them, right?
Well,
And that's the problem.
especially in New York. You
Yes.
look at Schumer, Jeffries,
Oh,
Hochul. My goodness, they especially appease and allow this. And I think the DSA, compared to California, I believe the DSA or this that mentality has a stronger chokehold. And this is where I'm like, okay, Democrats, right? Like, why are you guys not? But you're pushing back on this a little, because I believe, your typical Democrat, Republican, yeah, they're maybe like once here, once there, but they're not like, right? Probably can't see my hands, but this is where I see New York being especially vulnerable, and I just hope they're vulnerable to Republicans and not further DSA.
yeah, listen, I think Mamdani has I keep going back to him. I think he's the most political, influential character in the last, since Trump,
Yeah.
right? To come onto the scene. I mean, like, I don't like the guy at all, but he's a gifted politician. The way he take interviews, the way he can get away with the things he says is mind boggling to me. If I said that, I wouldn't get away with that. I don't know any candidate that would have. So it's mind boggling how he can handle those questions and do what he does. And yeah, he's a brilliant politician. I think that it's such a poor representation of the country. Like, I think that the country laughs at New York a lot more than they laugh at California, and to Rich's point, there's more Republicans in California, I think there are in New York probably. I mean, it's a
I
bigger
think
state, but
I don't know if you're like Florida, Texas, you're probably equally laughing at both of them.
yeah, yeah.
But,
But
it
Mamdani, I think, gives you a face
he does.
much more than Bass or Rahman ever did, right? I think Hochul does.
Yeah, I think the
Kavanaugh.
DSA is more effective here because Hochul herself is so unpopular, even, among people, and she's making deals with the devil to just hold power. Um, it will be interesting to see what happens in this gubernatorial election. But my guess, I'm just it'll be really interesting to see how your average New Yorker responds in this upcoming gubernatorial election and how much can be how much sway like Bruce Blakeman will have. He was the county executive of Nassau County, but I don't want to be all negative. So back to the question of where. Well, maybe you could expand a little. You were in hospitality, you pivot to more tech, and you can explain that a little. And then where do you see opportunity?
Yeah, great question. I think, years ago when, the AI first came on, I remember like, South Park did a funny episode on it years ago and how you can just like use it to like talk to your friends and whatnot. And there was, but then I started just playing around, stumbling around. I was like, oh, this could help me with coding and developing. And so learning, like, prompting and all that. So I went through a phase where I just kind of was like, all right, I'm going to go out a lot less. I'm going to just choose to just kind of learn these things and take a different approach. And, you learn the hard way, right? A lot of like frustrating moments and like the models continue to change, right? Like the Claude and the GPT model you dealt with 3 years ago are different today. I mean, they're different every couple months, right?
Yeah.
So, and just learning how to adapt to that and the changes that come with it has been really exciting. I related, there was a film I rewatched. I'm a big rewatcher and I could just, I talk film all day, but There Will Be Blood with Daniel Day-Lewis, one of my favorites. And the beginning starts off with, just a regular guy going down, finding a little gold, turning that gold into a little land and then oil and becoming a big oil baron, right? The guy started with nothing, right? Saw opportunity. And once in a while, America, every so often, these things come along, give opportunity, right? Internet gave a lot of opportunity if you went for it. And I believe AI is that push. And so when I laugh at people being against data centers, it's like, I think they got to have a more critical mind into it. I think, Suhas Subramaniam, Democrat in Virginia, he's got the more data centers in his district than anyone else. He speaks to it really well. He comes from tech. He comes from a very practical mind. I wish Democrats took more his approach to it. But the opportunity that I see in tech is, like the ability, you see a lot of people who are trying to make a quick buck. I think that, when you speak to an AI bubble, that bubble will eventually, I don't look at it so much as a bubble, but more just like it'll recalibrate instead of a pop like any other industry does.
You'll
Um,
shake out the bad.
yeah, people will come up with fraud and whatnot, and you'll weed that out. You always have that. But the things it can do is incredible, right? I mean, like things that I've been able to I can do this and build this and put this together and the data you can get from it and just the creativity you can bring. So if you're, if you're a creative mind, the options are endless, right? I mean, I have like a thousand things on my to-do list with the projects I work on, which is what drives me into it. So I think that if people I always say to people, like, go on, like, find out what your passions, like, everyone knows their passions, but like, find out like some things in your passions that you want to like tap into and build. Like, I want to have a website that does this. I want an app that does this, or I want to, I want help with this. Or I want to brainstorm on these things, like, and dive into it. I think that getting into that, everyone should be working on their own AI projects. It's going to be like, and everyone should have their own AI essentially, right? And not like you have to build it from scratch, but you should
Yeah.
be able to like have your own ecosystem where you're working on things and you're customizing it to your skill sets and your abilities. I think that it will create more opportunity and not just the rich get richer. I really don't see this just being a moment for the big companies to get rich. I do think that a lot will come from this. I think more people from nowhere to something will come from this, just as we've seen in other industries.
Okay. So if you were could say one thing to policymakers right now, local and federal, but what would you advise them on?
Yeah, I think better well, your PR firms all should get fired and, start fresh because the messaging has been awful on the energy, and everyone just assumes data center equals higher energy bills, and that is not always the case. Has it been the case in places? Sure, but but when was that, 2018? So,
And not all data centers are the same.
yeah, and I love how everyone's like, "Well, I just don't want it near me or the noise," or it's like, "What I do me a favor, look what else is around you," right? Like, it's you don't just have, Starbucks and Neiman Marcus around you, you know? So I
Yeah.
think, like, there's a lack of understanding that there are way worse things already around you, you just may not know it. This is just a topic that they're so obsessed with. And that's
Yeah.
why I say they got to get better PR and transparency, and show people like how this doesn't affect them. And on the flip side, I've gone to towns where they don't have much and you build a data center in there and it's not just that town that all of a sudden now gets a lot of jobs, but the little towns around them, they'll drive an hour, hour and a half for work every day
Yeah.
when the money's good and
Yeah.
there's not a whole lot around. So it brings opportunity to these little towns that no one's ever heard of that creates some jobs and gets people out of, and in more into a better skill set environment for them. So it does bring a new wave in an economy that I think people got to realize is here or not. And on the flip side, like I don't see China not building data centers,
Yeah.
and I don't see their people protesting against them, and good luck with that. So I just think it's something that the PR firms need to do a way better job of being transparent and honest about the positivities that come with it and the realities of the false negatives.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think one thing I see is if you understand kind of zoning, building codes, and there's data centers of maybe 2 decades ago or whatnot, or even more recently, that were just like server farms, right? How they were typically they in many places considered them just like an office, right? Or they, they so they could be built a lot closer to residents because, like a doctor's office, a dentist, your attorney's office can be typically is allowed to be built closer to a residential neighborhood. So I look at some of those towns in North Virginia. And I really cringe when I hear people say, but they're all too loud. It's like, well, no, those local municipalities understood a little bit better that they should have never been built that close, right? Like the bigger hyperscale ones maybe fit more of a light industrial zoning and whatnot.
Yeah,
And
there've been a lot of hearings where people were complaining about noise from, like, a nightclub or a restaurant.
yeah,
Like,
right.
you can complain all you want, but, like, there are like, to your point, there's rules, there's levels and regulations that come with it, and so it's like, just because
Yeah.
you don't like it doesn't mean that everything around you changes, and I think we're seeing that exacerbation right now.
Yeah, and I think the exception is being advertised as the rule, right? Yet some of these smaller municipalities don't maybe understand. I think they're getting wiser, and hopefully, in my opinion, there is some push down guidance from people that know. So take like it. I look it up. The rest of New York, this empty spaces, these warehouses, these factories, that are just sitting abandoned or they're zoned, industrial not being used. Those sites like, those are great for maybe, like, a hyperscale because they're actually a lot cleaner than much of the industrial that you could end up with there. And I've also, the argument if the power, right, these these data centers that demand a consistent, steady amount of power, right? If the power plant, power generation, whatever plant, however it's being, if they're not fully utilized, they actually can spread their fixed cost. And a data center comes in and takes that constant power, it helps them spread fixed costs, the utility across a lot more units. So the units that they do sell for the residential can end up cheaper. So I just think there's so much misinformation.
That's what blows my mind about the whole thing is the misinformation and the right of way and how and that's why I think like, again, no one's perfect, but I think Josh Shapiro and Wes Moore have actually done a really good job with this. I think the way they speak to it is very practical. They don't fall into the script. And if you look at what they're doing on their states, I think the numbers speak for themselves with the infrastructure and the investments that are coming and the companies that are going into both those states. And so I think that's a blueprint back for the Democrats on how leadership can be understanding of it's here. We got to, work with it and control it, not just boycott it and let someone else do it.
It's
And that's what I've noticed with AI too. I see like my friends who are like, some of my friends are very anti AI, and I'm like, you're missing the boat, right? Like, this is like, you got to get with it. It's here whether you want it to or not.
so if you were a high schooler, what would you your junior year, what would you suggest? And no holds bar, right? Whether college is on the board or not, and which maybe region of the country, where do you see job opportunities, both geographically and which markets, and also to settle down in?
If I was, doing it all again, I was in high school. I don't know if I would do the college or I'd even look into the college route, to be honest with you at this point. I think that, I would be focusing on, getting certifications, right? I'd be looking at Palantir's website. I'd be looking at, drawing a blank, but there's, NVIDIA. I'd be looking on both those sites. I'd be trying to get as much certifications as I could to get into companies like that as possible and
Yeah.
learning as much credentials as those companies are looking for. And both those companies offer a lot of courses. You could pay for some are free. So I'd be doing a lot of my time in that and building my resume around that. And then I would be building websites and I'd be building my GitHub and my profile in that sense. So I have some like real things to send out. And then I would try to, I find what, creative ways of like whether creating like voiceover videos or whatnot, and just start pitching that on LinkedIn, different, companies. And that's what I would do if I was young and aggressive in that sense. Just get out there, just over like, think 20 years ago, if you wanted to get in touch with the CEO of a company, you and I could not do that. Right now, it's like just, I mean, the amount of people I can just DM, right? It's just they respond, they respond. They don't, they don't. But like, I would just go big on that in a strategic way of just getting my stuff out there. And I'd plan in that sense. And then as far as like, where I would look to live, I would suggest to anyone that, obviously lock in a job and whatnot and try to like build your credit up. I would not, I would say like living in a city would be a great experience. I don't know if I'd suggest living in New York tomorrow. But I think like living in some sort of like city life is great. I do think like a year of travel is something I wish I had done earlier and just like a full year of it. But I think you got to line up some remote jobs, which you can do these days, right? Like you could travel not, just on a trust fund and, okay, I'm going to work X amount of hours remote every day and do that. And with the work that I'd be focusing on coming out of high school, that's what I'd be doing, right? I think the 9 to 5s are kind of tough. I think that the workplace is shifted so much where you could be in a workplace environment, but I think so much of it is remote and global in that
Yeah.
sense. There's a lot of like Middle East companies trying to buy. Like I've turned down Dubai twice. Like I'm not moving to Dubai. So I think that there's a lot of global interaction, and we just look at like these Zooms and how these have changed, and just like the way we communicate through YouTube and Substack, and so everything is just so much more connected. That I think for youth, I'd feel very optimistic. I really would. I think that, and I also would say to the youth, don't be afraid. And to pull Scott Galloway, don't be afraid to go out there and like be a knucklehead, right? Go out there with your friends. Like we've all, I'm not saying like develop a drinking habit, but
Yeah.
like it's
Right.
healthy to get drunk one night, right, out of your
Yeah.
life, and to
Try
be a
something.
knucklehead. Yeah, do something that you're like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. So you learn, right?
Yeah.
I think that everyone's afraid to make decisions, so they just stay in these bubbles. And we live through social media. It's like, go live is what I would say. Is like, go do all these things, but like, yeah, go experience, go talk, go up to a stranger in a bar and make conversation, not in a creepy way, but like, hey, how
Yeah.
are you? My name's so and so. What are you doing here?
Yeah. So sorry, Richard.
I just one last question about AI. I always people that are much more knowledgeable about it than I am, and I'm admittedly a novice when it comes to AI. I use it, but I certainly am not. I haven't even stepped on the playing field yet. I just got drafted, and my question is: do you believe that we are in some type of actual race for AI supremacy with China? Is that really a thing, or is that more of a scare tactic to get American politicians on board with more
Great question. I
restraint?
I think there's back to that transparency in the PR. I think that the government will not fully let on to the full scope of it, and so we're left to, the media, like, kinda asking that question that you just did, like, "Are we really in a battle with China?" We hear people say it, but we don't, like, so and so hasn't come out and made it declarative, and even if Trump did, I don't think that the country would all get behind it. We see that half the country opposes everything he says and does. So I don't even think that would help. I think personally that it's not just a race of AI. I think that we are in a, I've heard that the term a Manhattan Project race. I don't know if the result is as pivotal as a nuclear bomb but I do think that we are in a race with China, and the AI race, the space race, and this extraterrestrial race are all tied together. And I think that that is probably more of the Manhattan Project they speak of. I personally think that the whoever uncovers what's beyond this planet and taps into that in the next wave, that I think is the Manhattan Project of our time. And I think that AI is somehow tied into it. I don't know if that AI is necessarily like, people have said, is that alien technology? I don't necessarily say that, but I do think it is all tied together in some way, shape, or form. And I don't know if we'll ever fully understand because, I would hope the government wouldn't just come out and share some of our secrets either. So it's kind of a good thing we might not fully understand it.
I love that take. I do sense a lot of optimism in you, and I love that. So that being said, I guess I kind of approach it a different way, or it's kind of maybe a two-parter here. Where do you, what part of America, or given there's so much division, how do we come together? How do we live coming together? Kind of break some of those walls down.
Yeah, it's going to be a little cheesy, my response, but it's, I think, the only way to do it. But it starts with yourself, right? Everyone is so wrapped up in what everyone else is doing, right? And I don't have time to care what anyone else is doing personally, right? And I don't have time to care what anyone thinks about what I think. If you don't like what I think or I say, you are free to unfollow me. You are free to not talk to me. You are free to disagree with me. I don't really care. And I think that approach, and not that it's like it's the end of the world or it's like he didn't agree with me. Oh my God. It's like, okay. And I think that we just got to not really care, focus on ourselves. And I think that there's a lot of anger out there. And I think so many people are, instead of focusing on themselves, they're focusing on what everyone else is doing because it's easier than, everyone, like, I listen to Gary Vee a lot. I think everyone should listen to Gary Vee. And he always says, everyone's a finger pointer, not enough thumb pointing, right? And so if everyone does that, like everyone's pointing out instead of reflecting in, and it's so true. If everyone just stopped for a second and pointing out and just took a minute of reflection inward, we get a little better. And then listen, I can make a list of terrible, politicians, terrible podcasters, YouTubers. I can also make a list of some incredible voices out there, right? There's some people in the news that I think do a great job, right? Like Elizabeth Vargas on News Nation is absolutely insane. She's just so smart, so dead on, so in the middle. You don't really know who she's voting for, which is great. She's a journalist. She's got some great insight. I think I think there's some really good people out there who do a good job of just trying to tell truth without creating, a chaos. So I think the more we get away from that, and eventually, like, all this does is listen, I think that some of these people get a reckoning, like I've said, some of these people are under investigation. Some of these people are gonna face elections. And so, like, I just think that in general, it all fades away and they get stuck to their isolations. Like, you're always gonna have the lunatics out there, but they're gonna be confined to their corner better. And I think that eventually it does, people get back to just normalcy. Just takes time. I mean, I'll leave it this, like, when we talk about COVID, think of like you being 100 years from now, if you're in history class, and how you look at this period of time, we're still in such a, we're still in it, right? We're
Yeah,
still in
yeah,
the COVID
yeah.
chapter in that sense, right? Like, if you're looking at it from 100 years ago, right? Like, it's still so recently. So we're still in this like post-COVID world of figuring things out, where our social world recalibrated, the way we look at, capitalism has recalibrated in many senses. So I think like we are still trying to get the voices back to reason instead of like the YouTubers. So
And that
the
that kind of comes full circle though with your point earlier. Get out and live, right?
yeah.
Stop reading and complaining about other people living. Get out and live yourself. Put the phone down, right? At any age, but the youth,
The,
yeah.
the, the keyboard warriors, right?
Yeah.
Like, I enjoy going on our our two ways because we can chat and back and forth. I think we've all been guilty of it, but like the chats, like I really don't get into it because it's like the back and the forth. It's like I really don't care what you think or you say. Like, and I don't mean that in a mean way, right?
Right.
Like we're all entitled to have our opinion, our thing. I'm not getting into the back and forth with you
Yeah.
in the chats. Like, if you want to call me up and have a chat, like if you want to video me and we can have a conversation, sure. But this like back and forth of declarative statements is like not helping our
Yeah.
society.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I was complaining to Richard the other day. I said, I feel like, and this isn't just on two way. Some people, the people I don't want to engage with are the people that have already made their mind up that don't actually genuinely want to engage. They're there to either convince me of something, or when I'm talking, they're more focused on what they're going to say back. Right? Like at a certain point, get up, get out. Go find some other people.
That's
It,
oh, go ahead, Richard.
it's team sports, right? It's the my quarterback can never be bad because he wears the right uniform. And I've always thought that our political environment would be well suited if we took the sports reporters in a newspaper and told them to go cover the mayor's office for a year and tell the political guys to go cover the local football team for a year, because the amount of BS that people tolerate in political reporting would not be tolerated in sports. If you're in Philadelphia and you try to tell me the quarterback of the Eagles that threw 4 interceptions in Dallas on Sunday is still, he didn't have a bad day. Dallas had a much better day. Nobody's going to buy that, and I think that's where we're at with political reporting. I thought, it's really, really to your point, Maddie, about that lady on News Nation, Elizabeth
Yeah.
Vargas. Yes, yeah, she's really good, and unfortunately, they just don't get the clicks. And to your point about keyboard warriors, it's so easy to say things on social media or in chats on Zoom calls that you would never say it on the phone, let alone to somebody's face in person.
Yeah. Especially when your face isn't on camera, right? Even just, some people won't even show their face on camera. It's just so much easier to kind of to say that.
Yeah, I would call me old school. Like I have that very like same attitude of like I have no problem saying this to your face. Would you say
Yeah.
this to my face? Is the
Yeah.
question. And that's the thing. It's like most people don't. So I have no energy for you then, right? Not worth the time. The one thing I was gonna say about the if I was that 18-year-old kid or the advice to young kid, be the last person in the room to speak. Everyone is like what you said, Kelly, about thinking of a reaction. I think that's the problem. Like I like to be the last one to speak in meetings I'm in, and like unless I am leading a presentation or I don't like to go first. I like to hear what everyone has to say and then go. And I find like that's the most helpful tools in these rooms. And I think that everyone isn't listening. They're just like, this is what I'm going to say, like in a gotcha moment. Yeah. And Richard, when you talk about sports, I don't like Stephen A. Smith covering sports. I actually like him covering politics. He's way better at politics than sports because when you come from a sports world, you're like, wait a second, you're going to tell me that guy had a good game, like to what you just said.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
it's simple, and we've lost that in politics. And so I will say this: Stephen A. is going to put himself on the debate stage. He won't fully. He doesn't want to fully run because he's making way too much money, but he's going to put himself on the stage. He's already said that. And so it's going to be really interesting to see him going at it with all the Democrats.
Yeah, that's how we kind of got to talking to each other in a two-way community. Is dark horse candidates was a topic for 2028, Mark Halperin's 28 conversation, and you said something, and I believe a lot of people mocked you for Stephen A. Smith. I agree with you. He's not going to run because he's making way too much money. But again, your point earlier about Donald Trump and Mamdani having a lot in common.
Oh,
Mamdani was readily dismissed by everybody in the Democratic Party, the New York State Democratic Party, when he started running. They're like, he's just a social media guy. He's never done anything in the legislature. Just don't take him seriously, much like they did with Trump coming down the escalator in 2015. And I'm not saying Stephen A. Smith is a pretty young guy. He's made a lot of money, maybe 2032. I don't know, but I agree with you. I cannot listen to him talk about sports. I stopped watching First Take a long time ago. But when he talks politics on his podcast, it's pretty interesting.
Listen, I used to like Cuomo a lot more on News Nation. I haven't enjoyed him the last couple months. A little too left for me. But when he has Bill O'Reilly and Stephen A. on, and I listen to how Stephen A. interacts in politics with a humility, with an open mindedness, and he doesn't come at it with his sports takes, it's refreshing. And then I hear him on a show, and like he had a great conversation with Anna Paulina Luna recently. Like he'll talk to anyone. He went on Sean Hannity's show, but Democrats won't talk to him. Gavin won't go on his show. AOC won't go on his show. Mamdani won't go on his show. I thought he was great on Bill Maher. I think that he's going to go on stage. He's got a gift of gab. He really does. The way he can speak, it's like an artist up there. So he's going to go up there and he's going to rip these people apart, rightfully so. And they're going to be at a loss of words. And I really think, the other person to get mocked for that I'll stand by is Wes Moore. I really think the only person who can go head to toe with, Stephen A is Wes Moore. I think Stephen A would have a hard time going at Wes Moore is my point. And I just, I've heard all the stories about the medals with him, but I stick that there are some good people on that side that can bring it back. And I think Stephen A will expose that a little bit.
What do you think about Josh Shapiro?
I will tell you this. I went to Israel when Lieberman and Gore were running for president. And I got there and I thought that everyone in Israel would be rooting for the idea of a Jewish vice president. And it was the opposite. Everyone there said, nope. And this is how long ago, right? Everyone said, no, the world blames Jews enough. The last thing we need is a Jew in the White House. And for a long time, I kind of felt the opposite of that. Like, well, they live in Israel. I get it. But I would not, there's not a single Jewish candidate right now that I would vote for, including Shapiro, Ossoff. I would vote for Rubio in a heartbeat over Shapiro. He's been a huge disappointment to me in how he wrote a book on his faith and then using his excuse in his interviews to critique Israel. He should know better. Above anyone else, he should know better. The way he spent time in Israel and he understands it. And I think that he's been a huge disappointment to me. I think he's smart. He's a good governor, and I expected more from him. That's why I say that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, sorry, Richard.
Oh no, I just one of the things I wanted to ask you. You said in the two-way platform. Obviously, you're a fan of the Kennedys. I was as well. I think Jack Kennedy might have been the most important president of the 20th century with the Cuban Missile Crisis and how he managed that situation and dealt with the Soviets in the manner in which he did. If we took America's population and put them into 1960, today's population, what would the breakdown be? I think like 75% of Americans would be Democrats. They would be Kennedy Democrats if we took society to today and put them back at that point in time. What do you think about that proposition?
That's a great question and observation. I think that I'm a little biased because yeah, he's my favorite of all time, and not for like there's so many obvious reasons why, but when you really dive into his service and him wanting to go and serve and what he did over there and just everything the way about him and just, but I do agree that I think that a lot of us would fall into Kennedy policies. And I think that's what we miss most. Like, you can argue that Kennedy would fall more in line with the Republicans today, less the Democrats. But, there's also a lot of aspects of the Republicans he doesn't align with. So I think like he really brought the best of both worlds. And I think, yeah, probably, if he was up there tomorrow, yeah, his charisma and the way he could speak and whatnot, but his policies alone, I think that if we did a Coke Pepsi challenge, blind tested everyone, and you didn't see an RD, and you're like, just check these boxes, I think 80% of America would go along with how Kennedy viewed things because he was not soft on foreign policy, and he was not a socialist, but he also wanted things to be better for everyone at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
But
think
he
Kennedy's
understood moderation too.
yeah,
And
and I think Kennedy's contagious optimism would be very attractive as
God, we need
America.
it.
When he said we're going to the moon, I think that's one of the best speeches an American president has ever given. And I just think his love of country and his optimism would just be infectious in today's political landscape.
And we need that. We really do. And that's what brings me back to him all the time is that infectiousness of positivity and service for country. And it's like him and his brother, they didn't have to go serve. These guys had everything handed to them, right? You talk about nepo babies, like, and get into it for the right reasons versus the wrong reasons. Nowadays these kids get into the Congress to make money. He was doing it the opposite. He was doing it to do good, and he had all the money. So it's yeah, it's I think that I would argue that America changed more on November 22nd, 1963, than any other day in American history, other than July 4th.
Wow,
Yeah,
that's interesting.
yeah, I know
Um,
it's I can go down for that for a while, but I think that
yeah,
just turning point of that was I mean,
it
yeah.
it totally changed, definitely, well, the presidency, but also America's, sense of security and whatnot. So, and it's funny, Kennedy, young family, again, shape, active, healthy, getting out there, doing it.
But he wasn't healthy.
Well, I'm so yeah,
Yeah.
the image he presented, he
Yeah.
was sickly, but I was very active. Yeah, he was sick. I'm I guess I'm suggesting the
The
image.
image. Yeah.
So, but would you say we hear, I don't know if this is doomerism, we hear, but this idea that, the American dream is economically unfeasible or dead. Can't buy homes, the college debt. Do you believe that's true? And, or if it is, or what could we do to mitigate or
I don't
ensure?
think it's true. I think it's become way harder. I think the problem you have now is the people that accomplished the last people that accomplished what we would call the American dream, like find success, they own a home, they're taking care of their kids right now.
Yeah.
Right. So, how many 65 to 75-year-olds are taking care of their 35 to 40-year-old kids right now? And so so you see this like bitterness in them. They're like, wait a second, this is what I did. I got my house, I got all this. Why can't my kid get all this? Why am I taking care of my kid right now? So there's a frustration in that. And the kids obviously frustrated too, because they weren't able to accomplish what mom and dad were. So I think there's this like we're stuck in this little bit. And I just don't think we've done a whole lot in the last 30, 40 years really to make it better. And so it's hard to like everyone wants to pinpoint on one president, one party, and that's just not practical. It's a culmination of things that have led to this that
Yeah.
little by little
Do you
we've
have any
shot.
comment on what you think kind of the biggest items were that got us here?
Well, I think the way the market shifted in the '80s and just how that became such a different business and world,
The
and
gutting out of the, like, manufacturing and industrial, is that what you're, or just rise of
like
corporate?
the way the stock markets became the wild, wild west
Oh, yeah.
in the '80s and just in the early '80s, and like it wasn't sexy in the '70s, but it was the '80s. So I think like the way the markets shifted and it became this, we kind of lost the middle class the moment the markets became, the momentum of America. And that was the beginning. And then, letting, these companies kind of doing what the mob was doing for a while and buying these homes and doing this, it's just a lot of corporate. I don't want to call it corruption because it's legal, but it's using the laws to your advantage in ways that you shouldn't be using the laws to your advantage, and then not having people who want to change the system because they benefit from the
Y
people who are benefiting from it. So,
yeah.
and then yeah, the money in politics. I mean, that was a huge thing too that we got to get rid of. We allowed that. That was a huge change. And was it 2007 we did that or
Citizens United?
yeah,
Can't remember the exact date, but yeah, that
Yeah.
sounds like a wide open,
that
like,
really changed it. Yeah.
what yeah, but, hard to get, the Congress to regulate itself. Hard to get Congress to actually do anything, but
And I think that, again, we do these things that we're not transparent in it, right? Obamacare was great if you wanted to give accessible healthcare, but it was not affordable healthcare, right?
yeah,
And the insurance companies have profited 1,400% since then. So it's
yeah,
like, if you can't have a conversation with someone with practical mindset on that, that's the tough part, right? So it's all these little things that we've done and we just keep kicking the can down the road, playing the blame game. That's why I do think that my hope is that we've come to a point where we're going to elect, leaders in both parties who are going to bring some positive instead of a blame game. Like my advice to be the Democrats, like stop saying Trump to everything,
yeah,
right? Like,
Yeah.
especially come 2028, like this whole blaming Trump just does not work. Excuse me. And I think that the person I've seen do it the least amount, and when he does it, it's the most strategic, is Wes Moore. He does not play the blame game. He actually has solutions and answers where everyone else just makes everything a referendum on Donald Trump. And it's such a turnoff.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's a lot of finger pointing, not not a lot of back at you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I could not agree more. I said that actually to Dan Turntine when he was on the two-way platform once. I just asked him, I said, what are the odds that any serious Democrat considering running for president in 28 could give a speech and not say Trump? And he said zero. So, and I agree with you about Westmore. I think he's a dark horse candidate. The controversy over his medals as a veteran, somebody who deployed a lot overseas, I think that's much ado about nothing. You don't have a lot of say in what you're awarded. Where you get in trouble with medals is if you lie about what you received. So again, I'm not too familiar with all the details of that controversy, but there's one question that I would like to ask you as we start to wrap up. Has the Democratic Party lost you and people like you forever, or is there a road to redemption?
There and I consider myself an independent, right? I would caution the Republicans, you better not put a JD Vance out there. You're not gonna get my vote with a Vance. I love Marco Rubio. You would have my vote in a New York minute with Rubio. But the Democrats have not lost me. And I would say the best thing I've ever done politically was to be a free agent. It is so freeing to look at a ballot and not just look for R&D, but to like, okay, let me see who aligns with my policies, right? And to do some digging. It's very healthy to do that. So I go into it with a very open mind on the policies that are important to me. And I might not align with most independent voters. Like when I hear like the statistics of independence, I'm like, well, that's not me. I'm that's not my top issues. I would still vote for Trump tomorrow if it was again Trump versus Kamala. Like I don't regret my vote, but the Democrats, yeah, the path back to me is listen to more Stephen A. Smith, who calls out your anti-Semitism and your nonsense for DSA. Listen to guys like Wes Moore, and I just like look at what he's doing for his state and Baltimore has gotten way better. And I would argue that the sphere does not go into Baltimore if it's still the crime infested city that I knew it was 20 years ago. Right. You look at the infrastructure investment he's getting, and I think that it takes, just with Israel and getting back to Democratic Party, I actually don't want a Jewish candidate personally, but it's that doesn't win or lose me a vote. I want someone to have a practical understanding of the military importance that Israel provides. And I would bet the house that Wes Moore, who was in the 82nd Airborne, who served overseas, understands that better than anyone else in the party.
Yeah. It's funny you say that because I actually think both parties, I'm an independent, but I think both parties really are at risk of, they seem to be, maybe it's, I don't know, a younger generation or people like, but man, don't take for granted because when you boil people down to just a party, I think they are foolish to be looking at, especially the people maybe like the younger millennials or maybe, I don't know, some people sometimes hard to kind of put millennials all together, but that's what I see, like these establishment parties. And I think that's what the Republicans very much did that. And then look, Trump came in, right? And the Democrats, again, in my opinion, Mandami and Trump are very similar. And you kind of miss that at your own peril. But I just see the establishment, the DC swamp, right? All of that. They really, I understand how they want to hold on to their power and whatnot, but it's going to be people that can fight that and step outside of that mentality. I think that will have success. So as we kind of, well, my last one when we wrap up here, what is something that you makes you, or what are some things that make you uniquely proud, to be an American, and then what's one thing people aren't talking about but we should be?
Great questions. There are moments where, like you will get, these like, okay, you're watching a national anthem, right? And, like you're watching a stadium just come together for like a brief moment. And for that 3 minutes, no one is putting on a Democrat or Republican hat. They're just coming together for national anthem. You're watching these games and those little moments where you're like, okay, like as cheesy as that might be, like there's these little moments where you still are like, there is still some hope for America. There are some leaders out there who say the right thing and tap into the American dream. I'm sorry, what was the last thing you
What's one thing that's not being talked about? Or maybe just some things, you know,
Well, I think it's so much negative out there, and it's so easy to fall into these YouTubes and isolations and have your hubs of media. But if you do some diving, there are some people out there really doing it right. And I think that like I go to News Nation a lot. That's the reason it's the fastest growing cable network. And so the people are saying we want more of this. We want
Yeah.
less. If you look at the ratings, they want less of the partisan. They want more of this. So like eventually, like the numbers don't lie, right? As much as the media wants to portray that we're going further left or further right, like look at how it takes to get to 270 and the practicality that goes into it. I think that we always the statistic I love the most is looking at the different elections of like this person voted for Clinton, Obama, Trump, Biden, Trump. It's like,
Yeah.
there is no rhyme to it. It's, we are human beings who are not, most of us are not party allegiant, and we just want practicality and we want some reason. And so I think that the people want more of that. It's the social media, the cell phones, and then like don't get caught up in the podcast, the YouTube clicks. That doesn't mean it's all American voters
Yep.
necessarily. Uh,
Right.
so people get really locked into that. It's like how much of that is even American citizens and even real.
Yep.
And 13-year-olds listen to podcasts and 15-year-olds listen to YouTubes is still different than actual voters uh,
Right.
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
270 range. So it's
That's
just
such an important point.
yeah.
That really is. And Maddie, so thank you so much. We loved hearing your take and everything. And just again, I like we mentioned, there's so many great things happening here, and America is so unique. And we love hearing all the different people. And I think Richard's got one thing on the way out, but we're grateful. Thank you for taking your time to talk with us, and hope you
Yeah, I
enjoy.
got two light questions for you, Maddie. One, an In-N-Out burger was just built about 10 minutes from my home, and I'm a virgin to In-N-Out. I'm going to go sometime this week before I start my vacation. What should I order?
Well, you got to do a number one, the double double, and do the fries animal style.
Okay, I'm writing this down.
And the number one you'll come that you can swap out the onions if you want raw or cooked. That's a onion preference, but it'll come with sauce, lettuce, tomato, all the good stuff. So and then I go milkshake, vanilla personally. They're incredible, but it's great. It really is.
You will not be disappointed. You will
All
be
right.
although
Looking
it's just opening up, give yourself some time. There might be a line.
Yeah, it's been open for
Oh, okay.
almost 2 weeks now. So they don't have their contractors doing traffic control anymore for all the people that were going. So thank you very much. I appreciate that. And then finally, today is July 19th, Sunday. We're recording this before the World Cup final. For those of you who don't know, Maddie is a soccer football aficionado, and he really knows his stuff. And we would be remiss if we did not ask Maddie for his prediction for today's.
Well, thank you. I must say Argentina. You can't go against Messi and the GOAT. Any sports fan will know when you're on the field with greatness, like you're playing with Jordan, there's this extra oomph you got, and they're gonna ride that. And Spain's young. They've come very far. They should feel very proud of where they come. These kids grew up with Messi posters on the wall, and Argentina is gonna just play with a fire that this is gonna be a Messi World Cup personally. So yeah, Argentina.
Awesome.
Yeah. I really appreciate you both having me. It was great chatting. Really was. And I hope to do it again soon sometime.
Yeah, hopefully when we
Absolutely.
come back in a year, New York is all fixed.
I'll have to get out to New York sometime soon again. I really appreciate you both having me on and chat. It was a lot of fun.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Maddie. Appreciate you.
All right. I'll see you guys soon.
Bye.